kind of model from the sort of models we have within the ePortfolio world at the moment. So connecting these two things together seems to me to be quite challenging. So here's one of Helen Barrett's sort of saying what she would like to move on towards. I think something like 2006 she did this, from an institutional focus to more planning, individual-oriented, from test of skills toward deep learning, from institution-centred to the use of Web 2. And of course, in many ways, this is a beautiful idea, and many IT people bought into that idea as well. But it's not without problems, I think. I mean, Yoki Benkler has a very similar sort of set of ideas as Helen, but on the IT side, where his book on developing networks is very idealistic about looking at peer-to-peer movements. But essentially, both of them assume a benign economy. They assume that there's lots of money and that everybody has reasonably good opportunities. So particularly, I think, things like from the metaphor of portfolios or test of skills is inappropriate, because even at the height of the recent boom, people didn't automatically have the ability to access that. And in a recession, or indeed to any young person coming through, a portfolio can lead to these deep learning outcomes in terms of the personal learning they can do. And I think particularly for people like apprentices, perhaps, things like RPL are really quite important for that. So in the UK, there's some body, a GIST body called HERO, has been reviewing higher education's reaction to those national services which have been produced. As I've said, for all HE achievement to be there, and HE needs to respond to that. As I said, potentially it's a fabulous resource for the learner to explore what they can do, and for the advisor to assist in that. So, for example, things like application to HE are not just administrative processes. I think in the UK we're more likely to think that than you are here, but they are potentially deep learning experiences for people, and the learning is implicit within them, which needs to be brought out perhaps more. So it would really be quite difficult for higher education not to provide this. So in a sense there's a dynamic going on, that the government is proposing things, and even though there's not a formal requirement on HE to follow, in fact the dynamic draws us in that direction. So again, I think this is the sort of new system which is driving us compared to what we have had in the past. In many ways, I think what we have in the UK is similar to what we have elsewhere in Europe. We have a number of rich data resources which are being created, and now services to make use of them. But there's a real set of problems with this new sort of context in which we must work, because the learner doesn't own the data, and the learner needn't have any entitlement to make use of the data, even though it is personal data the learner themselves very often has created. So one of the things we find is that the EU Commission have recognised this as an issue, because people will simply not make use of some of those resources, I think, unless they have a real sort of sense of ownership of them. And so one of the most significant things that they're doing is a very large set of projects around how can we give the individual learner control of their personal data. Now this is something that Emma, in a sense, will be talking around a bit later on, because in the regional networks that were established in the UK, where people could be enrolled on several different providers at the same time, in that context, there was a lack of ability to share information between the providers themselves to assist the learner. So clearly there, the learner's experience was significantly affected in some cases, I think, by that. And you would want to have an integrated set of services to provide the learner in those sorts of contexts. So again, the ability to actually give the learner control and to pass information between the providers as they wish is something that really is a requirement upon us, I think. So again, going back to what is the web in a sense, the web is a bit of a quantum world. Because as our children shows, the way the internet works really is as a means of interaction and engagement and conversation and sharing between people. But these interactions are all based on something that was developed way back in the 1980s, really. I was sort of around at the time, listened to people that were involved in any way. But really, it was this link between Harvard in the UK and Oxford and CERN on France's border, and it was a means of simply planning across very large quantities of data. That's all it was. And from that, a huge amount of scientific effort moved on. So those conversations of the exchanging of data were really important. It's what we could call a network effect. By sharing the data and providing it into a different context, that becomes very important. So we can think, I think, of services which could help in the learner context more specifically. For example, use of services to harvest data. So if I'm going to do an RPR process, the data I have forgotten about, or the certificates I have lost, are recovered for me and provided back to me. And evidence distillation services, which will not tell me what that data's value is, but will assist me in determining what the data's value is. So in other words, take away the sort of the drudgery, which in many cases acts as a barrier to people engaging in those